Hello, everyone. My name is Mary Fasek. I am the founder of Upgrade Accessibility and Pride Our Way. My pronouns are she, her, and my visual description is I am a Lebanese woman with short dark curly hair. I am wearing glasses, headphones, and the Pride Our Way shirt. I want to take a moment to warn everyone that there may be some sensitive topics discussed today. That is why we ask you to, to be 18 or over in order to attend today's webinar. Before we begin, Prior Way would like to take a moment to acknowledge with utmost respect that the land we stand upon today is a traditional and ancestral home of many indigenous peoples. The land known as Turtle Island by many indigenous people was stolen and renamed North America by white colonizers who destroy lives along with a way of life. Please take a moment to consider the legacies of violence, displacement, and settlement that bring us here together today. We must practice this education and inclusion as we recognize our own history, responsibility, and commitment to displaced and colonized people everywhere. And with that, I will hand it over to our moderator for today, Jenna, who will introduce herself as well as giving a visual description. Jenna.
Thank you, Mary, for organizing Pride Our Way in this great panel. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenna Tenyuk. I use the pronoun she, her, and my visual description is I'm an Asian woman with long black hair. I'm wearing light purple tinted glasses and a colorful patterned shirt. I'm a writer, speaker, and EDI consultant, and I'm passionate about helping people find and speak their voices, especially because I was silent in my own story as a queer woman of color who grew up in the church. I'm joining you from Toronto, or what you may colonially know as Toronto. I'm looking forward to being your moderator today, exploring the intersections of disability, sexuality, and gender identity. So let's hear from our amazing group of panelists. Bonnie, we'll start with you.
Hey, everyone. My phone is not silent. Apologies. My name is Bonnie Amor. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a light-skinned person of color, white mestiza, with short, dark hair. I have blue headphones on. In the background is very gay, tropical wallpaper with two white lamps, my background. I'm a writer. I focus on issues of race, place, and power, decolonization of travel culture, very critical of tourism industry, and as well as gender, food, environment, all kinds of things, and disability, of course. I also give lectures, I teach workshops, whether on writing or about decolonizing travel culture, and at times being trans. And yes, I believe that was part of the introduction. Again, thank you, Mary, and everyone for being a part of this panel.
Thank you, Bonnie. Christopher, let's hear from you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Christopher Economou. I use he, him, and ze, them pronouns. Either is fine. I am a white genderqueer man. I have short brown hair, small framed glasses. They kind of echo my face. I'm wearing a short sleeve button-up shirt with a white and black pattern, and I'm sitting back on a blue pillow in front of a generally white room. Below me, who you may see throughout, is my squishmallow Leo, who I'm using to help with my current surgery recovery. I am not quite as impressive as the people that we've met so far, but I'm 21. I'm an artist from Southern California, specifically on Tonga land. I am attending UCLA studying communication and disability studies. And my work outside of school is focused on my own experiences with ugliness, with disability, with transness, with queerness, and how all of my intersectional identities kind of form my own self-concept and how I can create community within those sub-communities. And yeah, I'm just really excited to be here and talk about my experiences. And thank you so much for having me, Mary.
Thank you, Christopher. And in the chat, someone said, I love squishmallows and you are impressive. And our last panelist, Katrina.
Hello, thanks to Mary for inviting me to be part of this, and really lovely to be here with all of you. My name is Katrina. I use they, them pronouns. My visual description is that I am a white non-binary person. I have my background blurred out because it's my kitchen, and I am wearing a navy suit jacket and a navy t-shirt. And I am coming to you from the unceded territory of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho people, which is Denver, Colorado. And I am a writer. Currently, I'm writing for endometriosis.net as a patient advocate. I am also a tutor for students with learning disabilities, specifically dyslexia and ADHD, executive functioning, things like that. And I also am very interested in dreaming and how dreaming intersects with queerness, gender identity, and also our interaction with natural landscapes. And I am the regional representative for Colorado and New Mexico of the International Association for the Study of Dreams. And I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina, and thank you to all our panelists for introducing themselves. So we're going to start with a general question and then more specific ones for each panelist. So this question is for everyone, and I'll let you know when you're up next. So what's the biggest misconception you face about your sexuality and or gender identity simply because you're disabled, chronically ill? And Katrina, we'll start with you.
So how this shows up for me most often is that because one of my chronic illnesses is endometriosis, I'm often going to gynecology offices. And when I first show up, often, even if my gender identity is in the paperwork, I'm assumed to be a woman, and I'm also often assumed to be not in a queer relationship. So I've often had doctors, just throw in the word boyfriend or husband instead of asking if I'm there alone. And so, I just know that I have to always be prepared to correct people, frustratingly so, even if it's in the paperwork that they have about me. And now I'm actually, because I just moved to Colorado, going to negotiate that all over again with all of my new providers, trying to speak up and say, here are my pronouns, here's my gender identity, I'm queer, but of course the paperwork doesn't always even ask you those questions. And so sometimes I've had to say, hey, your paperwork didn't ask for this. This is my information. And we'll see. I actually have 4 doctor's appointments this next week. So we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so it's the assuming just by, my appearance, what my gender and what my sexual orientation are.
Thank you, Katrina. You raise a lot around all those assumptions that are made and that, preparation of being prepared to correct people, even if it's in the paperwork, and how exhausting that is, and now that you've moved and having to do that all over again. Thank you for sharing some of those challenges. Bonnie, what has been your experience?
I would say, I would echo that definitely. And just that a lot of all the medical industrial complex is, it comes from a cishet lens when they look at your body and everything. So just the ways that they talk about it. I remember having my hysterectomy and just like even coming home with the discharge papers where it was like, what is a womb? And I was like, a womb, like, I just don't like to call it that. It's like, it's a house for a baby. And that's just so strange to me. Or just the kind of reluctance to even go ahead with the hysterectomy because don't you want babies? What, are you sure you don't want babies? And just continuing to say that because almost all my doctors are male, cis male. Well, I assume I should say. And so that kind of insistence as well every time, even before I had my hysterectomy, I think a lot of us with uteruses, like you have to get your pee checked, they have to get a urine sample, and it's because you might be pregnant. And I've like advocated for other people, especially lesbians, cis lesbians, who are just like, this is a waste of time. I'm in the emergency room, like I need this. And it takes a lot of pushing them. And even after I had my last surgery, they were like, it doesn't matter. So that's strange. And I guess I would speak to the fact that it's just a surprise that you can be both. Like if you walk into a medical setting or anything, or just in general, it's like you're both of these things. The default is always white. The default is always straight and cis, right? And just living at those multiple margins. I think an assumption with being disabled and then adding the queer thing is that I'm lying when I walk into a medical setting, and especially in the ER. I think it's definitely, they look at your race, they look at the queerness, they look at my tattoos, and I think queerness has always been associated with the counterculture, with deceit, being young and being feminized. There's other layers to that. So I think assumptions are about lying, about not being believed, and about what we want to do with our bodies. Yeah.
Thank you, Bonnie. There's a lot there. I'm trying to, echo and write down some of your reflections. You bring up that, those assumptions about lying and, not being believed, which, we experience at these multiple intersections, and especially, living at these multiple margins where, white, straight, cis is the default and the lens that, our medical system is seen through. Thank you. Christopher.
Yeah, I would say the number one misconception I've faced is a little bit related to what the other two have been speaking about, but I was diagnosed with my chronic illness before I had any memories. I was 18 months old, and it's the only thing I've ever known, right? And as I kind of grew into my own identity in middle school and high school, the number one thing I noticed about like queer discourse and disability discourse when they did intersect is everybody everybody had the assumption that all disabled people, and in my case, assigned female at birth people, were raised in the same way that non-disabled people of that assigned gender were. And something that I came to notice over my kind of adolescence was I was completely removed from what typical gender socialization people kind of, that narrative that they push onto trans people, especially most recently with like trans misogyny and trying to separate the male socialization from the female socialization. And I think that biggest misconception that I am somehow experiencing the exact same thing that every other trans person who is assigned female at birth, just because I am assigned female at birth, and that there's no acknowledgement of that intersectionality of disability, and how growing up disabled and in special ed classes or having a care attendant or not being able to do certain activities like fundamentally alters how gender forms in your identity. So it really is, I guess, back to assumptions, like Katrina started us off with, that if I have this label, or as that label implies, as that label was forced onto me, I experience the same thing that everybody else does. And I think something beautiful that I've found in the past few years of disabled community is realizing that a lot of people neurodivergent people, people with my own chronic illness, et cetera, they're like, yeah, I am fundamentally altered in my socialization and in my current identity because of my disability and my experiences. And that's been a really beautiful thing to find. So I hope, events like this that like really center our intersectional experiences will help to get rid of that misconception in the future.
Thank you, Christopher, for sharing those experiences. And again, coming back to those assumptions that, if this label is there either by choice or put on you, that the experiences will be the same, and really, resisting and challenging those, because we have so many different experiences, even if we have similar labels. And that, that beautiful moment is being fundamentally altered by, your experiences. Thank you. And I just want to point to the chat. Someone said, I'm already crying for how much I relate to this. Thank you. And that everyone is amazing. So you soak that in. So Christopher, we're going to go back to you with this next question. What's the most difficult thing for you when it comes to being disabled, chronically ill, and intimacy in the bedroom?
Yeah, so this is definitely something I wanted to speak on. A lot of it has to do with my own perception of ableism, both internal and external, as well as attractiveness. I, like I said, have Marfan syndrome. It's a very visible illness. Like whenever I go to the doctor, they're like, damn, this kid is a textbook case of this thing. And throughout my life, I've experienced a lot of staring and a lot of ostracization for my body type, the way that I move, the way that I use certain gestures as like an aid to be able to see, stuff like that. And as I grew older and started having those intimate experiences, the number one insecurity that I had within them was feeling deformed, and feeling slow, and feeling there is no way I can have a non-disabled partner who won't feel embarrassed to have to kind of deal with me in that sexual situation, because I identify actually as aromantic. So I don't experience romantic attraction, and I don't particularly desire a romantic relationship, but I am interested in sexual intimacy and other forms of intimacy. And the fact that, most of the narratives surrounding disabled bodies we're either fetishized in the bedroom, or we're kind of delegated to a non-sexual piece of the household, like kind of grappling with that as someone who is quote unquote ugly because of their disability, and quote unquote slow, and quote unquote unexperienced, and quote unquote not normal in that sphere is really difficult to grapple with. And even just personally, like, of course, there's like so much beautiful, and like it gets me every time, the extreme body positivity within disability communities, like showing off mobility aids and like missing limbs and, sensory disabilities and all of this stuff in like this beautiful lens that society has never seen before. And yet I always feel that that's not me, because those people are beautiful anyway. I am not, because of my disability. So grappling with that, both internal ableism and trying to find people who aren't externally ableist when I need to ask for help, or I need want to feel validated in my pretty weak, which isn't a bad thing, weak and skinny and can be seen as deformed body. That's something I struggle with.
Thank you for sharing your experiences, Christopher. You speak to disabled folks either, being fetishized or non-sexual, those challenges, and a lot of those quote unquotes that, society puts on us, and that we can then, internalize. And, how you shared that extreme body positivity within disabled communities, and how powerful it is to be able to find ourselves, to find these different representations, but also the challenges that still exist within. Thank you for sharing. Katrina, can you describe your experiences with doctors and their lack of knowledge on caring for those in the LGBTQIA community? particularly in regards to those who are disabled and chronically ill?
Yeah, thank you for letting me share on this topic. It's actually something that I'm moving more and more into in terms of my advocacy because of things that I've experienced and things that friends of mine have experienced. One thing that came right to mind when I saw this question ahead of time was an experience that I had in the ER, which I think, as Bonnie mentioned earlier, is just kind of fraught with issues for people in the disability, chronic illness, and LGBTQIA communities. I had a surgery for endometriosis that was very intense last May and had some complications and had to go to the ER and was not able to bring anyone with me because of COVID restrictions. And so, was there feeling scared and alone. And my gender identity is marked within the university hospital system there. And there was a doctor who I assume was cis male who came to work with me. And it started off seemingly well because he said, "Oh, I see on your chart that you are non-binary, you use they, them pronouns, they, them pronouns. That's what you would like. Is that all right?" And I was feeling happy. And I said, "Yes, thank you." And then the next moment, he turned to the medical assistant and started using she pronouns just right away. And then this is the person who needed to examine me. And because I was there for endometriosis surgery and I was having unexplained bleeding, that meant that that person was the person who needed to do my pelvic exam. So it just, it goes back to that body autonomy piece. It goes back to, how can we feel comfortable in medical settings when there are so many layers? And when we're faced with people who are supposed to be helping us, but in the same moment are ignorant and not, just not seeing us for who we are. And, I continue to wrestle with how much do I want to bother with saying these things, my gender identity, my sexual orientation, because it is one more thing to navigate, and I have complex illness. So, what I'm there for is not necessarily for these things, but also I want to be seen for who I am and be able to show up as my full self as well. So, the anxiety that comes with that, and then also just all of the complex feelings that happen in those moments when you're there to get help and support, and then you have to deal with, not being recognized. So that really stands out as a moment and a very illustrative piece of, what can happen. And so because of experiences that I've had like that, I'm trying to figure out how to move into helping people who are becoming doctors get more robust training for how to work with these populations. And just yesterday, I was researching and discovered very little literature about what training people actually receive. And the literature that's out there talks about how programs are not designed to help people become more competent in these areas. So there's definitely a huge need out there.
Thank you, Katrina. You speak to that, huge need and gap within healthcare. And, from your experiences, I hear, the complexities, that exhaustion, and that phrase you said, not seeing us for who we are and being able to show up as your full self with all these different identities, and that exhaustion of, you're coming in for this, but do you advocate for this, and dealing with those assumptions. And it's tiring. It is exhausting. It is exhausting. And you're already going in for a scary process, and then having to deal with all of these challenges. Just take a deep breath. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Bonnie, our next question is for you. Talk a little bit about the lack of consideration of the intersection of the disabled, chronically ill, and LGBTQIA communities.
Well, I'll focus on one aspect, which is kind of all of it. Well, we have what I would call queer and trans domestic refugees, and this is a long-term thing. We are often not welcome in the home or kicked out of the home, feel not safe in the home, and in our communities, in your schools, locally. This is more of a thing for rural people, but you can have that lack of community in a lot of places. So, historically, we've gone to cities, or we've moved to places where you can be more welcoming or have more community or jobs. But houselessness, we know, is something that we suffer at disproportionate rates. So that kind of pulls us away from any kind of support network. And this has formed the need for chosen family. We have, again, historically, and I'm from New York, so this is more of, what we know. Is you had all these Black and brown headed households, mostly by trans women, especially here, where these families are not federally recognized, right? You don't a lot of times officially adopt, your kids or their family that you're looking over in your house. And so these ad hoc families is what people needed to do to, meet their material conditions and to survive. You're always going to fare better with other people. So we know the importance of chosen family. So when we look at, being disabled and adding sick, mad, DGF, disabled people into this mix, it's I feel unchosen. I feel like there's unchosen family when it comes to that, kind of an uninvited field. So when I look at, what has kind of furthered over the last few decades of more acceptance and more a bit of assimilation into cishet society, is, replicating cishet frameworks is something that does happen in many different ways. And one of them, I think, is closing off that community and kind of forgetting the importance of chosen family. I think for us as disabled people, care hubs and our care circles is kind of what we formed, again, to meet our material needs and to support each other, because, who else is there? We all know what it's like to be abandoned by the government, especially now, where we just have to fend for ourselves. So, and I have seen, especially the past 2 years, just kind of a bit of an appropriation of disability justice language and kind of putting it in an abled framework of when it comes to care and rest and community. But, everyone is back to normal and you're just left behind again. So it's just it's not just a hypocrisy, but it's losing out on the crip wisdom. It's losing out on what I think they really need us right now. They really need our wisdom right now. And so, how are we going to get stronger? How do they expect us to get stronger if we're left out of this community? So I would say, that would be kind of the bigger consideration that puts an umbrella over all of the issues that I think a lot of us understand and experience. Just kind of feeling like we've lost that tradition instead of kind of progressing to open it up more. It feels like some of those cishet frameworks are just kind of being replicated in the spaces that maybe going backwards a little bit, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Bonnie. I feel like we could take what you said in so many different directions. You said how to be stronger if we're left out of community, and the power of chosen family, but also, the challenges of, being unchosen in those spaces, and how that feeling and that reality of being left behind again and losing out on this, important crip wisdom, and especially, needing the community's voices right now with everything that has happened and happening currently. Yeah, thank you for that. Christopher and Katrina, would you like to respond in any way or add?
I can add just a little thing. Wow, that was a fantastic answer, Bonnie. Thank you so much. I would add on to that about feeling unchosen, particularly in this moment in unprecedented time, that a lot of queer community, despite appropriating that language of truly caring for like care and community, how many immediately threw away their caution for the community as soon as the government that has left us behind so many times said, it's okay, it's safe, you're good to go. And something I've noticed, particularly at my own university, is no matter how progressive everybody feels to be or how supportive of queer community or disabled community or other marginalized community, there are so many people at this moment in time who have completely forgotten that kind of collectivist idea of care and have, 2 years ago may have been, we need to protect those who are the most vulnerable, but in the end, their own care for themselves outweighs the care for the community. And that's something that I found really heartbreaking in university in particular, because that's kind of my frame of reference of that little hub of 45,000 students, and 30,000 of them won't do the bare minimum of wearing a mask and stuff like that. But something that I have found, just as maybe a little happy edge, potential better future on this, is the one space on our campus actually who has continued to advocate for continual masking and checking symptoms and vaccination cards is the LGBTQ Center. And it's been really helpful for me as I'm the editor-in-chief of the Queer News magazine at UCLA and a disabled queer person, and feeling that not only I am backed up by the greater queer community on campus, at least the institution of queer community on campus, and feel that I've kind of created this group of 20, 30 students who do feel that same care, whether or not they are disabled in whatever shape or form. That's been really beautiful. So I do really hope that these times have, pushed at least some people who, whether disabled or not, into truly analyzing those frameworks and wanting to work within them and strengthen them and create chosen family for disabled people rather than just leaving us behind. That's my hope.
Thank you for that hope, Christopher, and even being able to share an example, no matter how small that community is, of having that collectivist care when so often care for selves, outweighs care for the community. Katrina, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I put in the chat, I feel this so deeply right now. Part of the circumstances of my life are that even my own closest relationship was a struggle, to the point that I'm no longer in that relationship because of these issues. And I have found family that have not totally shown up in ways that would make me feel safe. And so it's really hard to feel like you thought you found, the space where you could, again, like show up as your full self and be recognized and be cared for, and to find out that no, you can't. And so, needing to go continuing to search for the people that are going to show that care. And I am lucky to have found some really great queer disability and chronic illness spaces, but they are not in person. So moving to a new place and trying to negotiate, where am I going to feel safe? And, you know, being invited to Pride this weekend, but not feeling safe to show up in a big group of people, you know, it's heartbreaking. So I do have, I think I'm a little bit not in the hope as much. I'm really glad that Christopher shared the hope, because right now I'm not so in that moment, but I do, you know, I'm trying to lean into that hope that I will find more community that can be in person, that feels safe. And I'm fine with online. I have no problem with online at all. And I feel like I've made some fantastic relationships online. But of course, I would also like to do things in person once in a while.
Thank you, Katrina. Yeah, that question, where am I going to feel safe, for all these different parts of, you know, our identities and experiences. Thank you all for sharing. There's so much to, you know, reflect and think about. We're going to take a 10-minute break and we will be back soon. And for those who are joining us, if you have any questions, please include them in the chat for our panelists.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to pick up where we left off, and I'm going to hand it back over to Jenna.
Thank you, Mary. So this question is for all of our panelists. Following up on the last question, what are your thoughts about having marriage equality as a member of the LGBTQIA community, but not as a member of the disabled chronically ill community? And Bonnie, we'll start with you.
So I changed locations, same person. I have a blue backrest that I'm leaning against. And well, it kind of goes to what I was saying before when it comes to assimilating into the kind of cishet framework with when it comes to our priorities and tolerance and all of that. I remember, all the debates around it in queer organizing spaces that I was a part of, where it was like, is this really our priority, and as queer people, and like, is this incremental change really going to lead to more benefits to us? And we've seen that that's mostly not the case, especially now, which is what a lot of us more radical folks were like, that is exactly what's going to happen when it comes to this kind of incrementalism. And I believe we can have it all. But I also don't believe that that's the priority. And I also thought that with marriage equality, it was just going to be like, we solved the gay thing in the United States. This is where I'm from, where I live. So, and then we don't have to give these other protections. I remember all of those conversations. And I think when it comes to, marriage equality for all of us, I hate the idea that we're presented even now that we can only do one thing at a time. Like, we're just going to focus on the non-disabled gays now, and then you guys, we can do in the future, which is a hypothetical. Like, no one has ever said that. We're just not on the list of priorities. So when it comes to that, it's just, again, being left behind. And one of the principal things when it comes to able people is that, or, the community or whatever, is just not knowing what our needs are, just not knowing. They don't know that we don't have marriage equality. They don't know that people have to be dishonest with the state about getting married, straight people, that they can't always show that they've moved in with someone, all those things. So I don't think that they know that. I don't think that disabled people are legally, have to, or it's legal to be paid a sub minimum wage for certain jobs. They just don't know these things. And when they do, if they're really focused on marriage equality, I don't think that they care to cater to that. So I think part of that assimilation, incrementalism, and adding to that ignorance, and as well as resistance to including other things, putting more things on the table, is it just adds to that abandonment. And at this point, I think we're very, very loud, so to speak. And so it's like, you're just trying not to hear us sometimes. So yes, I think that kind of speaks to the liberalism part that just never really works for us, as if we can't focus on more things than once. If we did, then we would have more things, I think.
Thank you, Bonnie. You speak to not knowing the needs of the community, and not even asking or caring, right? And that assimilation, the incrementalism. I think you said, we solve the gay thing, don't need other protections, and just like this one thing at a time, but not really recognizing the challenges that disabled and chronically ill people experience, and the intersections as well, right? That's what we're here talking about, these intersections. We're not, we don't live these single identities, and we bring a lot of importance to this question. Thank you. Christopher, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, I definitely echo a lot of what Ani said, and something that came to mind too with like that assimilation and like incrementalism is how people are responding to our current tragic state of affairs with Roe v. Wade. Even just a casual scroll on TikTok, you'll get every single type of response to the crisis that we're currently going through. And so many of them are gay people, you're next, or, you know, they're coming for your marriage equality next, or they're, you know, coming for whatever semi-related or like tangential right. And there's always people in the comment section, disabled people, who are like, hey guys, so many of these rights were never afforded to disabled people. They were never afforded to, even within the community, trans people, right? Like a lot of people forget that the fight for bodily autonomy has and needs to center trans people, and all of the anti-trans bills that have been happening over the last decade, especially in the last few years. And it's really tragic to me to see that, like Bonnie said, we're not quiet. We don't shut up about this. We're always advocating for ourselves and screaming at the top of our lungs. And yet so many people within the LGBTQ plus community, and really LGB community a lot of the times, don't care to listen to our separate struggles. And like Bonnie said, I think marriage equality is such a small issue in relation to, like I said, with trans rights. Like in the Supreme Court right now, it's being heard of whether or not trans people's rights are protected under anti-discrimination laws. Like that's not even in the cards yet. And the majority of people are focusing on a right that has been handed to us in the last less than a decade and is now being taken back. And yeah, I wish people held more space. I keep echoing Bonnie, but like, I think if we did have more priorities, we would have more things, and we don't have to focus in on the smallest possible change in order to get anywhere. I think that a lot of people who are leftists in this time are talking about radical optimism and radical joy, revolutionary joy, and trying really, really hard to imagine a future where things can be different. And I think if we keep focusing purely on the one set issue that has been the gay issue for the past however many decades, and we don't move on into more intersectional conversations with transness and disability, and how Blackness and indigeneity, you know, play a part in all of that as well, like we're not going to get anywhere at all. So I really hope all of the terrible things that are happening in these last few months and these last few years are a wake-up call to that care and that community that we spoke about earlier, that these things can be multifaceted and they can all be tackled and they can all be won. We really need to do it as a collective.
Thank you, Christopher. Yeah, I think, you know, you speak to that always having to advocate, and even within LGBTQIA communities, right? And saying like, this is not what the priority is or what the focus should be, when there's so many other priorities that, you know, we need to think about and explore. And yeah, that they all can be tackled if people cared, right? And if people made that a priority. Thank you, Katrina.
I don't have much to add because Bonnie and Christopher both said so many wonderful things. But I will say I am newer to the disability justice movement just because of when I got diagnosed with my different chronic illnesses, and also when I came out, which was much later in life. So I am someone who for a very long time had no idea about marriage inequality for disabled people. And now I do see how loud the community is, and still it is not reaching everybody. So, you know, it makes me really sad that despite how much people are advocating and speaking out, it's still only going so far. and only reaching so many people. So I think that says, unfortunately, like, let's all keep talking about it. And I think too, just hearing Bonnie speak about it, why couldn't it just be marriage equality across the board? It doesn't need to just be parceled out in these different communities. So yes, just wanting to own that, this is a newer awareness for myself. And so I think, yeah, continuing to talk about it, which is frustrating, but also will help continue to reach more people so that they actually know what's going on.
Thank you, Katrina. Yeah, and thank you for sharing, newer to these conversations around disability, queerness, gender identity, and for those who are also watching, you may be newer to these conversations as well, and thank you all for being here. For our next question, there's a distinct lack of authentic disabled representation in Hollywood, more specifically disabled and LGBTQIA. So in your opinion, why is that? And what would it take to change that? Sorry, and we'll be starting with Christopher.
Yeah, I love this question. It's a tough one because I honestly, at least for the how do we change it, I have very little idea because it's been persisting for so long. But for the why is that question, at least for the disabled community, I'll start with that, is disabled people are easy targets, at least from what I've seen in my experiences with media representation and even just like how people perceive my body every day. Like not to embarrass myself, I'm a Gen Z TikToker. So I'm very often on social media with like my disabled body. And I would say 90, maybe 70 to 90% of the comments that I receive are, wow, you really look like this monster from this movie. You really look like Tristana Medeiros from Rec, who actually is played by someone with Marfan syndrome. Or you look like Slender Man, or you look like this character from SCP or this video game. And the fact that the majority of people jump to, oh, you're disabled, you look a lot like a monster that I've seen on TV, is not a coincidence, because non-disabled society, and even more specifically able-bodied society, are afraid of deformity, and they're afraid of things that are physically different. And we get stared at in the street because they're trying to figure out what we are, rather than acknowledging that we are people that need as much complexity as anybody else. And from, mental illness being constantly, all of the time, demonized in horror films, to disabled bodies, like I said, being played, literally playing monsters, or in famous campy movies like Sleepaway Camp, trans bodies are the villain in the end, and you find out that the main character is, ooh, she's a trans woman. That's the whole conceit. She's the monster. Like, the fact that that's still persisting in famous movies like Psycho, where a man dresses up as his mother in order to kill women, or Buffalo Bill dresses in women's skin in order to kill women. Like, all of those themes are because the non-disabled, the cisgender, the straight, the sane people who are the 95% of Hollywood see us as freaks and see us as monsters. And that goes decades back from when we were freak shows in, carnivals and stuff in the United States and across the world. So why is that? Is ableism, it's saneism, it's racism a lot of the times, it's transphobia definitely, it's homophobia definitely. And the fact that only, what was it, like some ridiculous statistic, it's like less than 5% of the entirety of the film and TV industry is made up of disabled creatives. And it's about 25 to 30% of us make up the population of the world. And like, the fact that our voices aren't even there is a huge reason why we aren't seeing any differences, or we're seeing very incremental differences in how disability and queerness is portrayed. So I'll wrap it up because I've been talking for a while, but I would say what it would take to change that is having our bodies there, is having our voices there, and having, forcing the film industry to become accessible so that our bodies can be in the room, metaphorical or not, to tell the majority of filmmakers, if you keep portraying us as monsters, people are going to keep seeing us as monsters, and we will never have peace from ableism. And these narratives are contributing to the ableism we experience in our everyday lives. So I might hopefully work with the entertainment industry in my adult life. We'll see, fingers crossed. But I people like the 1 in 4 Coalition, headed by, Jim Lebrecht and a lot of other amazing disabled film creatives, forcing themselves into an industry that not only does not want them, but demonizes them. That's very important work that I think is going to make ripples in how everybody sees disabled bodies, even if it's just quote unquote on TV.
Thank you, Christopher. Hope to see you in some of those rooms. You bring up less than 5% is made up of disabled creatives, and just disabled voices and bodies not there, as well as queer and trans bodies. You spoke to, trans, queer, and disabled bodies are the monsters, and we know why, because, we're not in the room because of ableism, transphobia, homophobia, biphobia, right? And it's exhausting to see that representation, and also to, receive that hatred personally as well. Bonnie, would you like to follow up on that question?
I would start with the thing of the problem with Hollywood in general, which obviously echoes, dominant culture and hierarchies, period, is the default, the stand-in. So there's this idea, or at least the lie I think a lot of them tell themselves, that they need to stand in for a symbol of an oppressed group in order for the audience to empathize with those struggles, which rather they're empathizing with a fictional character played by a straight or a cis person, which is what as well as disabled, I'll go into that. And whiteness, the thing about white savior movies is that they need that, what do they call it, a Trojan horse. First you start with the, someone who is the default, and then the rest of us will follow. It's just the same thing with laws. And I remember, the woman who started Orange is the New Black, Jenji Cohen, with the white woman being the star and that being an issue. She was just she's a Trojan horse, and people have to identify with her. How many of us do? And instead of these women in prison, these other women in prison. Andrew Garfield said something about that recently. He said just that you need to, you need someone to empathize with. And that was important, that we need those empathy people, and that the hiring situation with representation for queer people is a separate issue. So that's how he excuses playing trans, playing gay, and sorry, but being a horrible actor. And why, is what bothers me. I'll just note for a second, I'm really bothered by this recent, I think people, especially cis men or however, I think they're playing us a lot when it comes to, well, you can't assume my sexuality, so I can play whatever character I want because it's my private information. Okay, it sounds like a cop-out, but whatever. Benedict Cumberbatch said this, and some other guy that I don't know. I think that's the Queer as Folk reboot. But to be more brief, that default stand-in, it has never helped us with anywhere. What has changed after Brokeback Mountain? Who is that movie for? I don't see that. And it's not ever done well because we're not behind the scenes. So they don't see the point. that I think when it comes to disability, any representation of LGBTQIA plus people is the discomfort aspect. Seeing a person, an actor that you have always considered to be straight or cisgender playing this character makes that dominant audience feel comfortable. If you saw a transgender person that we know is trans or maybe more visibly trans, as well as gay, all these things, that's going to make them feel uncomfortable. Like Billy Porter is not on the cover of Vogue for a reason. You know, shout out to Harry Styles, wear whatever you want, but we're not ever in the forefront of that, especially when it comes to BIPOC. So seeing a visibly disabled person, and there's a lot of ways that can manifest visibly, is just makes them feel uncomfortable. Disabled people make everyone feel uncomfortable, especially visible ones. The way that you talk, like you can't stutter, you can't, look away, you can't. It's not cool to be disabled in queer spaces. And I hate that. It's like we all have to talk cool or be charming, or I don't know. I haven't been to a gay bar in so long, but like everyone's just cool. And we're supposed to kind of perform a certain way. So I feel queer, trans, disabled people on screen make people feel uncomfortable. And that's the difference. We remind people of, the I guess the fragility of the body and the mind, of maybe their fate, of, so many things that come up that I can go into, but I would say that the discomfort and period, Hollywood profiting off of us. They don't want us in the room. They don't want us backstage. They don't want to get better. They want to make money. And they want the stand-ins to do that. They don't actually want any of us. So there's how to change that, right? Hiring behind the scenes and in front. The show Special on Netflix is very white. I think the second season was better. If you don't know, it's a gay white man with cerebral palsy. And I love this. There is a sex scene that they had where he had never had sex and he's well into adulthood and he contracted a sex worker. It's just such a, having sex while disabled, like we saw it and naked and from a gay lens, cis gay male white, but it was just great. So, I just use that as an example of some things that have changed. What did they do to change it? He's the writer and he's the star. So, and they have other disabled people in it. And so that's, I think it's always hiring is always the answer to these questions, but also to break down like this idea that we need dominant culture and others to empathize with. That actually takes us backwards. And if you can't empathize with me and my face and my body, then you don't care about us. So shut up.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, again, you speak to being in the room and also having a voice in the room, right? And that, discomfort, profit, stand-ins, and, they always start with cis straight white people so that they can feel something for that, that character and that empathy without us actually being in the room, telling our own stories, showing our own, faces and bodies in these spaces. Thank you. Katrina, is there anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I've been thinking also about, not having us in the room is a big part of it. And, some of the other tropes that tend to happen is that disabled or chronically ill people are the butt of the joke. I'm thinking specifically of a character on Grace and Frankie who has a similar kind of, they never talk about what illness she has, but is allergic to a lot of things. And, I identified with that character a lot, having mast cell activation syndrome. And her reason for being there is to be the butt of a joke. And had somebody, with my illness or other similar illnesses been in the room, potentially that character would have not had those things and they would have had to rewrite their jokes because they weren't very funny. I also think about the kind of another trope is, to get pity, right? The kind of pity porn and, oh, like, don't we feel bad for this person? And again, if there were disabled people in the room, perhaps those stories would shift dramatically and be different. And I also think that, sometimes I am a big fan, for whatever reason, of medical shows. And so, I wonder how often people are in the room that have the different illnesses or injuries or what disabilities that they're writing about. I'm thinking about Grey's Anatomy this season that had a character with endometriosis. And I felt glad that there was representation, but also they included some myths in the storyline about it. And so, it's like, yay, not yay. It's like one step forward, two steps back. So yeah, I think it's an issue of ableism. It's an issue of not really wanting to try very hard to get it right, because it's serving the story and it's serving a lot of other things, that Bonnie and Christopher have talked about that runs Hollywood, instead of, really trying to represent and do a good job of telling accurate stories that don't just use people as tropes.
Thank you, Katrina. You also speak to that. Yeah, just not wanting to try hard and needing that character to be the joke, to be pity porn, to be inspirational. And even when, the characters are there, it's like that one step forward, two steps back, and those challenges of navigating and negotiating those scenarios. Thank you for all your responses. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes for the Q&A. So we'll see how much we can get to over the next few minutes. So our first question is, have panelists experienced any conflict between dealing with gender dysphoria and with chronic illness disability? And if so, do you have any coping tips? For example, this person uses their dead name in medical settings for safety and are unable to use a binder as their body can't cope with it. It feels as though they're constantly asking for things to be accessible and therefore don't deserve to also ask people to respect their gender identity and pronouns. So Christopher, can we start with you?
Sure. First of all, I just want to say I'm sorry. It's way too common, and it sucks to feel like we have to negotiate our needs, and especially with a lot of people, like we already, even in just transness, if there is just transness, there's so much to negotiate where it's like, well, I corrected you on my pronouns 6 times today. Do I want to correct you when you call me my dead name to the waiter or something like that? And adding even more identities on top of that has been really difficult. And I wouldn't say that I have too many tips, but something that I've explored in the last several years is disconnecting my body from traditional notions of gender and gender dysphoria. Like I mentioned very early in the panel, I was socialized very differently than a lot of my peers, being separated from traditional male-female socialization as a child. And with that came me not really attaching a gender to my body in the same way that a lot of people do. And, when I first came out and I was like, oh my God, I want to medically transition. I want to do all of these things. And then I took a lot of time to self-reflect and was like, maybe, my chest can be a disabled trans chest. Maybe it doesn't have to be a woman's chest, or my shoulders can just be my shoulders. They don't have to be a woman's shoulders. And this is definitely not me saying like dysphoria is all in your head and there's nothing, if you just think about it hard enough, it'll go away, because that's definitely not true. But something that I found helps, at least incrementally, especially when you kind of feel trapped in all the things that you feel you have to ask for and all those things that are traditionally not given to you, is do your best to practice self-care, which is it's a big cliche, but like something that I found helps me is like I photograph myself. I make art pieces about specifically being disabled and trans, and instilling the idea that I have a male body, or instilling the idea that I have a genderqueer, crippled, fucked up, deformed body. And that is beautiful. And it takes years and years, and I'm still in the process. Like, I'm healing right now. My body is healing from open heart surgery. I have a brand new kind of chest that I'm going to have to navigate in the next several months of my life and accept over the next several years of my life. And seeing your body as something that is your own rather than something that is assigned to you is something that has helped me personally. And one queer guy to whatever your gender identity is, my chest is just as male as the rest of me, and I don't bind because of lung issues. It's taken me several years to get the courage to ask my doctors, hey, can you maybe not misgender me, or asking a friend to help me with that. So it's a long process, but truly looking within yourself and solidifying your own self-concept and trying your best to use whatever tools are available to you to fight that feeling of kind of inadequacy, and like you aren't fitting the ideal of what a trans person or what a queer person or what a disabled person will be. It's hard, but I think it's worth it. And I don't know if that answer made any sense, but I'm with you 100%. And you are amazing. And I'm so happy that you are here and in this space of queer beautifulness. And I really hope that things improve for you, and that it gets a little easier, because luckily it has for me, and I hope that can be shared with other people.
Thank you, Christopher. You spoke to that internal self-reflection of solidifying, your own self-concept. And folks can check out your photography and art on your social media to see more of that. Thank you. Katrina, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I've been having a similar struggle myself in terms of my body. I'm also newer to coming out as non-binary, so I'm really in the beginning stages of figuring a lot of things out, and have had a lot of struggle and back and forth about, do I want to bind? Do I want top surgery? Do I want these different things? Do I need them? Can I have the body that I have and still feel non-binary? It's day-to-day different. And, I think there are some ways in which I feel like it would be easier potentially to navigate some of these medical spaces if I didn't have the chest that I have or the hips that I have. And so there are some ways in which, I find myself wishing for things to be different, and they are not. And so I think it is about, like Christopher said, finding that solid place within myself of being okay. And that just takes work, and it takes time, and it's not going to be overnight, and it may be years and years, or it may never resolve, right? So just continuing to tell myself that, at the end, full stop, like, I'm fine with who I am. And then coming from that place, interacting with doctors, I think, I'm not there yet, so I can't tell you how it feels to do it that way, but I have a sense of, thinking that if I am able to be in that more solid place and just be like, this is me, and this is my identity, and this is who I am, and having that kind of energy coming out from me, potentially could change the interaction, or at least would help me not be bothered as much when people are misgendering me, and maybe would give me more sustenance to correct someone who's misgendered me 6, 7, 8 times, on top of just dealing with whatever I'm there to interact with. So similarly to Christopher, I don't know how many tips beyond that I would have. It's a really challenging situation, but yeah, I think the more that we can all show up as our full selves so that others can see us that way and then help feel empowered, then that will, you know, just like Christopher is doing with the self-portraiture, that's going to have a positive impact.
Thank you, Katrina. You know, thank you for sharing where you're at, right? And that takes time. And, you know, one day you may feel that way, another day you may not, right? And, you know, speaking to those challenges. Thank you. Bonnie.
To echo, I mean, my first answer is I don't know either. I talk a lot because I write in the travel space. So, you know, often, especially this month, and I'm publishing something about it, it's like the only thing when it comes to queer travel is just like safety and just fear and like where is safe. And it comes down to a bunch of laws, which is just like not going to give you a full picture of safety. So it's the same thing. We're left to weigh our own risks. We're left to choose for ourselves when we can do this, when we can do that. And a lot of it can be based on trauma. So it's like, you know, maybe no one's going to fuck with me, but, you know, all the anxiety stopped me from like presenting a certain way or advocating for myself a certain way. In medical settings, I generally don't like ever talk about my gender in like that way. I often don't get misgendered to my face in medical settings out. Like when I have HHAs or when it's always when they call you on the phone, it's just like, isn't it like, you know, it's really old school to say like Miss or Mr. It's just like, it's so old school. And I get Mr. often as well because my name is like a masculine name in other countries anyway. So I often don't because they can kill me. You know, this can lead to just even worse treatment and it can make me sicker and more disabled. And I'm here for one reason, even though I have so many disabilities, like there's too much abuse and trauma for me to like even consider more things, which I have, you know, even just saying queerness, I'm just like, you know, I don't answer all questions honestly. Like at this point, I'm not going to tell you I smoke weed, just like everything you say will be used against you and getting treated. So, and the most important thing in my life is my health right now. It's just, it takes up everything. So, you know, just going through the saga and all the hard work of going through there, I just have medical questions. I don't give a fuck about your personality, being nice. I mean, I don't know. I just need to know, you know, the MRI, the diagnosis, like just tell me the things. So I deal with a lot of dysphoria in that sense. When it comes to binders, you know, I do experience pain sometimes because I have fibrocystic breast disease. Some things that for me, like some of what Christopher said, it's there's a lot to identify with. I'll try to be brief. And one thing is just going over yourself, what dysphoria looks like for you. And even if you have it at all, you know, I think, especially me when I was like transitioning when I was younger and then I kind of detransition or whatever, this has been a long journey for me. I'm in my mid 30s. You know, there's, I guess, an idea of what dysphoria would look like and how people transition. You have to remove the boobs or you have to get the phalloplasty or whatever the case, like there's the steps. Even right now, the cis kind of idea, conception of what transitioning looks like is like a 1, 2, 3 thing. They don't see it as an eternal thing or social change, which is a lot of it. We're talking about like socially, like this is just in our day-to-day lives, calling my name. Like it's annoying that we're at this basic level. So yeah, when I was younger, I just had to really be like, do I have to dress this way? Does this actually bother me? So now, like, you know, my dysphoria comes a lot from my hair. If it grows a little bit, like I'm freaking out. And then I had surgery, so I haven't gotten it done. Even my eyebrows, getting it done is just like, it's important to me physically. I don't feel well. Otherwise, I've just worked through a lot of stuff with my body. Again, being disabled has impacted my feelings about my body more than I think my gender. But it's a whole thing. I'm genderqueer, so it's just like nothing is really in a box. And just, I guess, one thing with having fibrocystic breast disease or getting mammograms and sonograms often, it's just like, I don't like to call them breasts, I just say my chest. And then so there's confusion scheduling appointments, and it's just like, it's not your chest, it's your breast. And I was just like, I don't know how far I want to push this conversation, but I'm just like, I just feel uncomfortable. Like, I don't know if I want to explain myself, like, just fucking give me the appointment. Like, maybe next time I'll just be like, I don't really like that word. So let's just do that and move on. So it's identifying what the actual things that really, make me feel like dissociating my body, and always, what is the word? Not navigating. I don't know the word I'm looking for right now, but just weighing the risks and the dangers versus how you feel. I think the last thing I wanted to say is, yes, that whole journey, I had to finally come to a place of like, I know myself and I have to know myself. And also just, with the indigeneity part of myself, as well as, just being in Ecuador and finally going there, I had this, like, just more of a feeling like just being a part of the land, and that relationship is just not like gendered, even though I do like feminize the earth and all these things, because that's a part of my cosmology. It's just like the earth doesn't care. Like, I prefer to be around trees than people. And it's just like, I feel accepted in this higher way. And, the most important person to accept me is myself. So it's a long-term thing. And unfortunately, I just deal with a lot of crap because I don't want to die. They've already abused me enough physically, and I already look like this. So people just assume often that you're trans anyway. I think the line between queer and trans, especially like lesbian, it's just, you're just other, you know what I mean?
Thank you, Bonnie. Speaking to that knowing self, identifying which parts are the challenges, with that dissociation with your body, and being accepted by the earth. I love that earth doesn't care, being accepted in this higher way. It's really beautiful. Okay, so we are at our time, but just wanted to end with this question, if folks are okay for just 5 more minutes before we end. What does queer, trans, genderqueer, disabled joy look like for you? And if you can just share a brief answer around that. I know we could be here for another hours talking about this. Katrina, can we start with you, please?
Well, I think for me, it really actually echoes on what Bonnie just said about being with the earth. I think that is where I find often the most joy, is just being out in nature, whether I'm actually being active or just being with, doesn't matter. That's when I feel the most connected, the most held, the most seen, and the happiest. And then I think the next answer would be being in community with other disabled, chronically ill, queer and trans people.
Thank you, Katrina. Christopher.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that second part. As a big part of queer, trans, disabled joy for me is community. Like, we're all hot, we're all have such diverse and beautiful experiences. We've all gone through so many multitudes of everything that the world can throw at us, and yet we continue to persist and we continue to exist. And the fact that I've, in the few short years that I've been an active artist on social media, that I found hundreds of people who are just like me, whether they have my exact chronic illness or not, who are like, this is my life, and I have found someone who has talked about it, and I feel welcome. Part of my queer, trans, disabled joy is being an open book and having people read me and say, this can be my autobiography. And that's something that I've been really embracing in the last few years. And that's just, I will never give that up. You'll have to tear it from my cold, dead, feeble hands. Seriously.
Thank you, Christopher. Bonnie.
And, it's the same thing. It's just, each other. So that's it. I love spaces like these. I remember the Crip Camp spaces. Also, Mary was a big part of. and just having our dance parties and all those things. So it's just having these spaces. Katrina touched on this earlier. I would really love IRL friendship and all these things. So many of us disabled people in the city, like we can't see each other. Not that I have a ton of friends anyway. So, but I love the memes. I love complaining. Is joy a part of, is complaining a part of joy? Like, I guess the release of just like, fuck these people, but we're not alone. So yeah, I guess I would say that. Even like a show like Special, which is kind of a comedy, like, we laugh through things and we have each other. So I feel much better even in my little support groups on Facebook. Like, you just can relax and like just talk about opioids and hating your body sometimes, and just like, again, it's not comfortable, it's not cool. So when you feel like you have the space to just be all of you, that leads to joy, right? And is healthy. So yeah, each other. I think that's always the answer. I would like more, but this is good.
Thank you, Bonnie. Yeah, the space to be all of you. Thank you, Bonnie, Christopher, Katrina, for sharing your stories and experiences. It can be really vulnerable to share these parts of ourselves, but we really appreciate it. And thank you to our participatory audience. If you've been touched or moved by something that one of these panelists said, reach out to them, message them, follow their work, support their work, because it can be really, really vulnerable, not knowing how folks are responding to these experiences. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to Mary for organizing this, and I will pass it back to Mary.
Thank you, Jenna. I want to take a moment to thank Katrina and Bonnie and Christopher for agreeing to do this. When I decided to put together Prior Way, I thought, this is a wild idea. I don't know if this is gonna work. And I honestly threw this together in 3 weeks, and I knew how important this was, because we're not included in Pride celebrations and Pride spaces. And I wanted it to be inclusive and accessible. And I want us to come together as a community because we are so strong. And as someone who just came out last year, I'm still navigating my identity, my gender identity, all of what you talked about today. I'm still trying to figure things out. So I think this conversation was extremely important to me. So again, thank you for your time and being so vulnerable. Everyone's payment information will be posted on Instagram. Please donate to them if you're able to. If not, please share their payment information. And to be transparent, they will be getting an honorarium. Thanks to our sponsors, because disabled people don't get paid for their time, and I wanted to make sure that disabled people got paid for their time. So thank you all again. We will see you in about an hour and a half for the live drag performance. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.